Hello, my name is Alejandro Rojas, and this is Open Mind UFO Magazine. In the last episode, we reviewed the United States Air Force's official investigation into UFOs, which ended in 1969, and one of their most remarkable cases. In that case, in 1952, Air Force investigators witnessed unidentified objects on radar over Washington, D.C. Although jets were scrambled, they were unable to identify the objects, and the case remains unsolved. Despite cases like this in their files, the military has claimed they have no interest in UFOs and say they do not investigate UFO cases. However, through the Freedom of Information Act, investigators have uncovered several documents that would indicate UFOs have been of interest and that the most important files were most likely never made public. The Air Force's final UFO investigation, called Project Blue Book, was closed in 1969 after a study conducted by the University of Colorado in conjunction with the Air Force determined there was no merit to the project. The reasons Project Blue Book should be closed were outlined in a document dated October 20th, 1969.
When Project Blue Book was closed, the program was closed by a guy called Brigadier General Carroll H. Bolender, and he wrote a memo, an air staff memo, and it actually stated something really, really curious. In it, on page 2, it stated, "Moreover, reports of unidentified flying objects which could affect national security are made in accordance with JNAP 146 and Air Force Manual 5511 and are not part of the Blue Book system."
So what is JNAP 146? JNAP stands for Joint Army Navy Air Force Publication, and documents such as Air Force Manual 5511 are based off of them. JNAP 146 detailed communication instructions for reporting vital intelligence sightings, often referred to by the acronym SERVICE. According to a copy of JNAP 146 found on the NSA's website, this includes reporting unidentified flying object. A website hosted by the Library and Archives of Canada regarding Canada's UFO files includes a poster with images of UFOs used to demonstrate what was to be reported. The website says that Canada instituted a joint reporting system with the U.S. called Service Merit in 1959 through 1960. However, copies of JNAP 146 can be found dating back to the early 1950s. The most recent reference to the JNAP 146 instructions was found in a U.S. Air Force document called Air Force Instructions 10206 in 2011. The circumstances surrounding the deletion of this reference are very peculiar. John Greenwald, creator of theblackvault.com, often referenced Air Force Instructions 10206 in lectures and even included it in a History Channel documentary on UFOs he helped produce. He felt that it demonstrated that despite what they tell the public, the Air Force is still interested in UFOs.
And I made a discovery in the form of an Air Force instruction labeled 10-206. And this was by the same agency that headed up Project Blue Book, the same agency that wants us to believe that there's nothing to UFOs. You'll see that the copy of this is dated 15 October 2008. In Chapter 5, you'll look about halfway down on this screenshot, they were instructing all of their pilots, all of the Air Force pilots, to report unidentified flying objects. Now, what is a UFO to the military if they've already figured out that that phenomena has nothing behind it? There's no reason. Remember when I told you that they stressed that no government agency has taken an interest in UFOs since then? What's this? This was black and white proof that the Department of the Air Force itself had black and white unidentified flying objects in their manual, and 100% of all Air Force pilots were instructed to follow this procedure, and if they were to see a UFO, they were going to report it.
In 2011, Lee Spiegel, staff writer for the Huffington Post, decided to write an article on the document. Greenwald helped him find it on the Air Force's website, and sure enough, it still referenced reporting UFOs. However, a few days later, when Spiegel went to get a screenshot of the document for his story, the chapter had been changed. He wrote about this coincidence in his article.
I remember this was in 2011 when I called the Air Force. I called the Pentagon, and I wanted to ask them some questions about how they go about with their procedures for Air Force personnel to report UFOs. And they said, well, we'll have to get back to you by the end of the day. And that was on a Thursday, and I didn't hear back from them. And then the next day, Friday, I called again, spoke to another person at the Pentagon, and they said, well, we don't have that answer for you yet, but we're working on it. And I said, okay, I'll cut them some slack. So the weekend came and went, Saturday and Sunday, and Monday, when I went back into into the files, the stuff that was there on Thursday was gone. Like what's this? And I know that I was on the right page because I had just retraced my steps between Thursday and Monday. The original UFO, unidentified flying object reporting procedure information was gone, and I couldn't find it anywhere else. I couldn't even find it less diminished than it was on Thursday, and I tried calling them again, and they had no explanation. But the thing was, and it's what made me write the story about it, was because I had the foresight on Thursday to make. I did a screen grab. I copied the 2008 version, and then on Monday I copied the new version. So I had two different versions between a few days, and that's what prompted me to write the story about it, asking how did these UFO rules vanish all of a sudden after I started calling. I'm not patting myself on the back over this. I'm not saying that, oh, it was because of me and my persistence. I'm just saying, what an interesting coincidence.
Greenwald sent a Freedom of Information Act request to get information on what had changed and why the changes had been made. They sent him a report, and in it, they listed service as no longer existing or being required. Even so, the timing of its removal was extraordinary. On his website, Greenwald also chronicles his effort to find the service UFO reports. Service reports were to be sent to the North American Aerospace Defense Command, also known as NORAD. However, when Greenwald filed a FOIA request for these files, he was sent a response that stated NORAD is a binational command subject to control of both Canadian and U.S. government agencies, and consequently is not subject to the U.S. Freedom of Information Act. Greenwald says in circa 2000, he decided to contact the Canadian government to inquire if he could get copies of any UFO reports they received via service. Canada's version of the FOIA is the Access to Information Act, referred to as the AIA. Greenwald called Canada's Department of National Defense to find out if, as a U.S. citizen, he could submit an AIA request. According to Greenwald, the person who answered the phone told him if the files were released to a Canadian, it should not be a problem to also get them to him. Greenwald then explained the types of files he was searching for, and to his utter amazement, the Canadian official said he had them lying right there on his desk, and for $3 he can ship them to him. These files are now available on his website and contain several UFO sightings from as late as the 1990s.
Before I got off the phone, he says, this isn't all of them. I was like, really? And he says, we collect them all. We got them, some copies here, but most of them, they're down in archives. There's thousands of them.
So where have the U.S. reports gone? Efforts to retrieve these files are still underway. However, there is another avenue that is used to report important UFO events. In the place of service, Air Force Instructions 10-206 now reference what is called operational reporting, or OPREP. In the past, UFO researchers have noted the term OPREP 3 on UFO documents. Australian UFO researcher Paul Dean has been taking a closer look, and it appears this may be the way important UFO sightings are being reported by the military today. The current Air Force Instruction 10-206 states the OPREP 3 system provides the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and intermediate commanders the information necessary for timely operational decisions. The main criterion for inclusion in the OPREP 3 system is essential information for command and control of aerospace forces. In other words, these are reports that are so important that they need to be quickly communicated straight up to the top of command. The instructions give guidance to different levels of importance and categories of reports that are identified by flag words. For instance, an OPREP 3 Pinnacle is a report that requires immediate notification to command and, among other things, is of national level interest. Nuke Flash is used for missile launches and re-entering space debris. Broken Arrow is a nuclear weapon detonation of radioactive contamination. Beta Giant refers to nuclear reactor or radiological accidents or incidents. The lowest level is Beeline, which is an OPREP 3 report that is Air Force level but not national level. Dean has also found that OPREP 3 is used among all branches of the military, and some branches have their own flag words.
The OPREP 3 reporting system, interestingly, goes right back to the Brigadier General Belander memo. In the Brigadier General Belander memo, he mentioned something called Air Force Manual 5511. And when you read the booklet that is Air Force Manual 5511, it talks about something called the Air Force Operational Reporting System. This is back in the 60s. Now, the Air Force Operational Reporting System, by about 1973, became the OPREP system. And there's one type of OPREP, a class of OPREP, a category of OPREP called an OPREP 3. An OPREP 3, in brackets after it, you usually see the word serious incident / serious event. It's a serious incident / serious event report. And without a doubt, UFO reports, serious UFO events from US military installations have been reported using the OPREP 3 system. The OPREP 3 system is where someone, a base commander, an intelligence officer, a safety officer, goes to a computer and literally thumps out OPREP 3, OPREP 3, OPREP 3 emergency. He describes it. We've got a UFO hovering over the base, could be helicopter, but probably not, making no noise, purple lights on board. It's been hovering for 16 minutes. We've got radar on it. We've got visual on it. We don't know what to do. He press send. It goes to the National Military Command Center in Washington, D.C., the J3 Department and the J2 Department. It goes to the White House. It goes to Air Force Headquarters. It goes to all the nearest military bases of where this event is occurring. Now, we've seen three actual examples from the 70s where OPREP 3s have been actually used for UFO reporting. We've got the documents for them. That's the good part. We also know that there's been at least 2 other occasions where OPREP 3s have been used to report UFOs, and we've got the documents for that too. They're just statements that say, another OPREP 3 was sent blah, 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 blah. So we've got 3 actual examples from Loring Air Force Base, Worth Smith Air Force Base and Pine Castle Test Range, where OPREP 3s were used in the 70s to report UFOs. And I'm convinced that the system would still be there available to report UFOs over US military installations. Nothing's changed. I've spoken to someone at a US military installation, and he said he doesn't know anything about UFOs as such, but he said to me, a UFO over a base, no matter how weird it is or how mundane it is, he said he didn't say would, but he said we could use an OPREP 3 to report it right up the chain of command.
Dean first noticed that OPREP 3 was being used to report UFOs when he was looking into UFO cases in the 70s. In particular, a case from the Pine Castle Electronic Warfare Range in Florida on May 14, 1978. The case made it into the papers, including a newspaper covering the military called Pacific Stars and Stripes. The incident began at about 10 p.m. local time when a woman called the Pine Castle Range to ask if they had any flares being dropped in the area. The duty officer said no, and she described seeing strange lights above nearby trees. She said they were red, green, and white. Soon after she disconnected, another witness called saying he and around 18 other witnesses were also seeing the lights. Naval personnel also saw the lights, and they were able to track the object on radar. According to the report, the radar operator said the object seemed to be evading his efforts to lock and track it on the computer, and at one point the object was moving at 400 to 500 knots, or about 460 to 575 miles per hour. The report was marked OPREP 3 Navy Blue, a Navy flag word. There has also been at least one report that has garnered an OPREP 3 Pinnacle, which, as we referenced earlier, is a highly important report needing immediate attention. Dean discovered this file in a group of files that was released from a FOIA request by UFO researchers Barry Greenwood and Lawrence Fawcett for the books Clear Intent and UFO Cover-Up, What the Government Won't Say. This report was part of a string of sightings on the US and Canadian border. This file can also be found on the Department of Defense website. It is on page 39 of a Department of Defense PDF of UFO files. The report reads, "A visual sighting of an unidentified object has been reported at Loring Air Force Base."
Loring Air Force Base, 1975, October. Over 3 nights, some weird objects. They looked a bit like helicopters. They acted like helicopters, but they didn't behave necessarily like helicopters, and they didn't make any sound. They were reported using the OPREP 3 system, and they weren't just reported up the chain of command and then that was it. They were actually investigated. They were investigated by the Air Force Weather Service, looking for temperature inversions in the area. They were investigated by the FBI, because the FBI wanted to work out who's flying, if it was helicopters, who's flying them into restricted air zones on over a nuclear armed base in the middle of northeastern United States. So the FBI looked into their own helicopter movements to see if it was in fact them. The Department of Natural Resources looked into their helicopter operations to see if they were using helicopters in the area. But continuously, the documents from the base, from Loring Air Force Base and the National Military Command Centre, they don't always use the word helicopter. They often use the word UFO. Sometimes they say, it was oval-shaped and a bright light, which had to chase it. It disappeared from the south of the base and it immediately went to the north of the base. It went across the border into Canada. Now the National Guard, Maine National Guard, I can't remember what unit or squadron, but they investigated it. They investigated if they could actually chase the thing if it happened again and again and again. They even got permission from Canadian government to actually cross into the Canadian land, like over the Canadian border, to chase this object. So this is a classic example where not only have a UFO event of some sort has been reported right up the chain of command, but it's also been investigated. I've actually counted it in that instance alone. There were 12 agencies that investigated that UFO report. There were 3 UFO reports over 3 nights, I should say. They were the agencies I mentioned before, plus Strategic Air Command Headquarters, Alternate Strategic Air Command Headquarters, 8th Air Force Base, NORAD 26th Division, and NORAD 23rd Division.
It is no wonder these cases are deserving of a vital reporting system such as OPREP 3. It is also no wonder that despite telling the public they're not interested in UFOs, they are in fact investigating these shocking cases of unidentified aircraft violating our most secure airspace. Dean says he and his UK-based colleague David Carmichael are still submitting FOIA requests for OPREP 3 UFO reports, but thus far have been told they do not exist. He notes it is likely a matter of getting the wording right. It's sort of a game. The DoD has posted a document on OPREP 3 that was released due to a FOIA request by a man named Armin Victorian. Dean says Carmichael was in contact with Victorian in the past and that Victorian had received a letter from the Office of the Secretary of Defense that stated, OPREP 3 reports containing information relating to unknown objects near U.S. military installation are considered extremely sensitive and thus not releasable. While that rings true, Dean has not been able to contact Victorian to get a copy of the letter, and they have not received a similar response to their FOIA requests. Dean and Carmichael have received the response. The responsibilities of redressing unidentified aerial devices or objects fall directly under the control of the Federal Aviation Administration, also known as the FAA, and the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Of course, NORAD is not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. As for the FAA, they recently told Greenwald they have no UFO files. This answer also does not address the fact there are files, including in the DoD's own records accessible online, that do show OPREP 3 reports have been created for UFO incidents. Dean says NORAD has told him they do not study what they call unknown tracks or NORAD remaining unknowns. However, he has been able to track these reports to an organization called the Center for Aerospace Analysis, but that organization no longer exists.
I don't know for sure if NORAD or the FAA are keeping files or keeping track on UFO reports. I wouldn't think that they'd want to, because for some of the same reasons that the Air Force stopped investigating UFOs after Project Blue Book. They just didn't want to be bogged down with so many files. However, I do think that investigations, official investigations of UFO sightings, credible sightings by credible people, including pilots, military and commercial pilots, that there are files being kept somewhere. Someone is investigating these. Former Air Force Colonel Chuck Holt has gone public in recent years saying, hey folks, if you think that the government is really not investigating UFOs, you're naive.
Project Blue Book includes thousands of reports, and many of them are very interesting. And according to the Air Force, around 701 of them remain unsolved. Even more important is the fact that these did not include the most important cases. Those apparently went to service and/or OPREP 3. The paper trail shows us UFO reports did go to OPREP 3, and the few reports that have been released, along with the credible testimony of military witnesses, demonstrate unidentified objects flew over bases with nuclear weapons, and the military did take notice. In the upcoming installments of Open Minds magazine, we will explore in closer detail the cases that warranted using the OPREP 3 reporting system, including UFOs over nuclear facilities. We will also explore what information can be found about the Center for Aerospace Analysis and what other little-known organizations may still be analyzing UFO cases. Regardless of whether one believes the UFO phenomena is real or not, what is clear from the Air Force's own records is that they have taken at least a handful of UFO reports seriously since 1969, despite claims to the contrary. And they do not seem to feel obligated to share this information with the public. We at Open Minds feel differently and will continue to bring you our findings and share with you the findings of others digging for the UFO information the Air Force seems reticent to share.